Hello, and welcome back to Bedtime Stories with Vice Vice Baby, where we will continue Ward number 6. Chapter 3. One autumn morning, Ivan Dmitrich, turning up the collar of his greatcoat and splashing through the mud, made his way by the side streets and back lanes to see some artisan and to collect some payment that was owing. He was in a gloomy mood, as he always was in the morning. In one of the side streets, he was met by 2 convicts in fetters and 4 soldiers with rifles in charge of them. Ivan Dmitrich had very often met convicts before, and they had always excited feelings of compassion and discomfort in him. But now in this meeting made a particular strange impression on him. It suddenly seemed to him for some reason that he too might be put into fetters and led through the mud to prison like that. After visiting the artisan, on the way home he met near the post office a police superintendent of his acquaintance, who greeted him and walked a few paces along the streets with him. And for some reason, this seemed to him suspicious. At home, he could not get the convicts or the soldiers with their rifles out of his head all day. And an unaccountable inward agitations prevented him from reading or concentrating his mind. In the evening, he did not light his lamp, and at night he could not sleep, but kept thinking that he might be arrested, put into fetters, and thrown into prison. He did not know of any harm he had done, and could be certain that he would never be guilty of murder, arson, or theft in the future either. But was it not easy to commit a crime by accident, unconsciously, and was not false witness always possible, and indeed, miscarriage of justice? It was not without good reason that the age-long experience of the simple people teaches that beggary and prison are ills none can be safe from. A judicial mistake is very possible as legal proceedings are conducted nowadays, and there is nothing to be wondered at in it. People who have an official professional relation to other men's sufferings, for instance judges, police officers, doctors, in course of time, through habit, grow so callous that they cannot, even if they wish it, take any but a formal attitude to their clients. In this respect, they are not different from the peasants who slaughter sheep and calves in the backyard and does not notice the blood. With this formal soulless attitude to human personality, the judge needs but one thing, time, in order to deprive an innocent man of all rights of property and to condemn him to penal servitude. Only the time spent on performing certain formalities for which the judge is paid his salary, and then it is all over. Then you may look in vain for justice and protection in this dirty, wretched little town 150 miles from a railway station. And indeed, is it not absurd even to think of justice when every kind of violence is accepted by society as a rational and consistent necessity, and every act of mercy, for instance, a verdict of acquittal, calls forth a perfect outburst of dissatisfied and revengeful feeling? In the morning, Ivan Dmitrich got up from his bed in a state of horror, with cold perspiration on his forehead, completely convinced that he might be arrested any minute. Since his gloomy thoughts of yesterday had haunted him so long, he thought it must be that there was some truth in them. They could not, indeed, have come to his mind without any grounds whatsoever. A policeman walking slowly passed by the windows. That was not for nothing. Here were 2 men standing still and silent near the house. Why were they silent? And agonizing days and nights followed for Ivan Dmitrich. Everyone who passed by the windows or came into the yard seemed to him a spy or a detective. At midday, the chief of police usually drove down the street with a pair of horses. He was going from his estate near the town to the police department. But Ivan Dmitrich fancied every time that he was driving especially quickly, and that he had a particular expression. It was evident that he was in haste to announce that there was a very important criminal in town. Ivan Dmitrich started at every ring at the bell and knock at the gate, and was agitated whenever he came upon anyone new at his landlady's. When he met police officers and gendarmes, he smiled and began whistling so as to seem unconcerned. He could not sleep for whole nights in succession, expecting to be arrested, but he snored loudly and sighed as though in deep sleep, that his landlady might think he was asleep, for if he could not sleep, it meant that he was tormented by the stings of conscience. What a piece of evidence. Facts and common sense persuaded him that all these terrors were nonsense and morbidity, that if one looked at the matter more broadly, there was nothing really terrible in arrest and imprisonment, so long as the conscience is at ease. But the more sensible and logical he reasoned, the more acute and agonizing his mental distress became. It might be compared with the story of a hermit who tried to cut a dwelling place for himself in a virgin forest. The more zealously he worked with his axe, the thicker the forest grew. In the end, Ivan Dmitrich, seeing it was useless, gave up reasoning altogether and abandoned himself entirely to despair and terror. He began to avoid people and to seek solitude. His official work had been distasteful to him before. Now it became unbearable to him. He was afraid they would somehow get him into trouble, would put a bribe in his pocket unnoticed and then denounce him, or that he would accidentally make a mistake in official papers that would appear to be fraudulent, or would lose other people's money. It is strange that his imagination had never at other times been so agile and inventive as now, when every day he thought of thousands of different reasons for being seriously anxious over his freedom and honor. But, on the other hand, his interest in the outer world, in books in particular, grew sensibly fainter, and his memory began to fail him. In the spring, when the snow melted, there were found in the ravine near the cemetery 2 half-decomposed corpses, the bodies of an old woman and a boy bearing the traces of death by violence. Nothing was talked of but these bodies and their unknown murderers. That people might not think he had been guilty of the crime, Ivan Dmitrich walked about the streets, smiling, and when he made acquaintances, he turned pale, flushed, and began declaring that there was no greater crime than the murder of the weak and defenseless. But his duplicity soon exhausted him, and after some reflection, he decided that in his position, the best thing to do was to hide in his landlady's cellar. He sat in the cellar all day and then all night. Then, another day was fiercely cold, and waiting till dusk, stole secretly, like a thief, back to his room. He stood in the middle of the room till daybreak, listening without stirring. Very early in the morning, before sunrise, some workmen came into the house. Ivan Dmitrich knew perfectly well that they had come to mend the stove in the kitchen, but terror did him that they were police officers disguised as workmen. He slipped stealthily out of the flat, and overcome by terror, ran along the streets without his cap and coat. Dogs raced after him barking. A peasant shouted somewhere behind him. The wind whistled in his ears, and it seemed to Ivan Dmitrich that the force and violence of the whole world was massed together behind his back and was chasing after him. He was stopped and brought home, and his landlady sent for a doctor. Dr. Andrei Yefimych, for whom we shall have more to say hereafter, prescribed cold compresses on his head and laurel drops, shook his head, and went away, telling the landlady he should not come again, as one should not interfere with people who are going out of their minds. As he had not the means to live at home and be nursed, Ivan Dmitrich was soon sent to the hospital and was there put into the ward for venereal patients. He could not sleep at night, was full of whims and fancies, and disturbed the patients. By Andrei Yemefich's orders, transferred to ward number 6. Within a year, Ivan Dmitrich was completely forgotten in the town, and his books, heaped up by his landlady in the sledge in the shed, were pulled to pieces by boys. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Bedtime Stories with Vice Baby. I hope you all have a good night and sweet dreams.